Many senior Amazon employees won't get cash raises this year. Amazon's senior managers and other senior leaders won't receive cash pay raises this year, Fortune has learned, eliminating a key reward for top employees at the online retailing giant. This is an article, Yahoo Finance, by Jason Del Rey. Some of these employees may receive additional company stock, but that's not guaranteed. Amazon compensation staff have started notifying some leaders about the changes and explaining this year's policy. The move applies to employees whose roles are classified internally as level 6 or higher, which is more or less middle management and above. But level 6 roles also include some individual contributors, such as senior software engineers. The compensation update applies to all employees at these levels, whether they are in office desk jobs or in managerial roles inside Amazon facilities, such as fulfillment centers. Historically, total compensation packages for many Amazon corporate employees consists of a larger ratio of stock compensation than at other tech companies. As such, Amazon spokesperson Margaret Callahan made clear in a statement the company's belief that senior Amazon employees have already benefited greatly from Amazon's share price increase of about 80% over the last 12 months. Amazon's compensation philosophy emphasizes ownership, which means that a portion of employee compensation includes RSUs, Callahan said in a statement to Fortune. The more senior you are in the company, the more your compensation includes RSUs than cash-based pay. Due to the growth in Amazon's stock price over the past year, approximately 77%, many employees' compensation will meaningfully exceed the amount that the company planned for them to earn when we set compensation last year and in prior years' compensation cycles. As a result, for this year's compensation cycle, we are prioritizing cash-based pay increases for employees whose compensation is weighted more heavily in base pay as opposed to stock. Translation: the more senior you are, the lower likelihood that you will see a cash payment. Some level 6 employees could still see a cash base increase if they were recently promoted or moved laterally into a completely new role. There's a chance that some employees at level 6 or above will receive additional restricted stock units or RSUs this year, but that is not guaranteed. For those level 6 and level 7 employees who do receive new RSUs, they will vest quarterly like they do for level 8 employees and above, rather than just twice a year. This compensation update comes as Amazon leaders under CEO Andy Jassy continue to look for ways to trim unnecessary costs and increase profitability while investing in growth areas such as generative AI. On Wednesday, Amazon announced a new $2.75 billion investment in the AI company Anthropic, adding to an earlier $1.25 billion investment in the company. Over the last couple of years, Amazon under CEO Andy Jassy has laid off more than 27,000 corporate employees while he focuses on investing in fewer, bigger bets. Amazon generating the largest quarterly operating profit in history, $13.2 billion in the fourth quarter of 2023. This is an article. I'm taking it from Yahoo Finance. I'll paste it in the show notes. This is Chuck G, and welcome to the 3 Deeper Cuts podcast, your lifestyle magazine for the practicing surgical pathologist. Every week, or every other week, we bring you something to think about, something to read, or something to listen to. 3 Deeper Cuts, as usual, is brought to you by Formalin Fix, paraffin embedded tissue, emphasis on the formalin. I felt like I was drinking formalin when I read this. So what this article is saying is that these corporate executives are, they work harder, they're performing better for the company, but they're making less money. the company is turning record profits in the last quarter. I chose this article because a good friend of mine is an executive at Amazon in the supply chain. His name's Phil, and we met back when we were stationed together at Camp Pendleton circa 2013 to 2016. Phil is a U.S. Marine, a graduate of the MBA program at Washington University in St. Louis. He is a husband. He is a logistics professional and a master at his craft. I wanted Phil on this podcast because many of the lessons that I apply in day-to-day practice are lessons that I learned from the Marine Corps logistics community. Further, as healthcare in the United States goes through this wave of corporatization, I feel it is critical that the young physician 5 years behind me is aware of the types of things that go on deep in the corporate world. Because the corporate world is coming for the trenches of medicine. What else is going on? So I'm entering year 2 of practice, and like I said, the practice of medicine in the United States is constantly under threat from corporate buyouts, AI, generative AI for diagnostic and therapeutic medicine is at our front door. Some of us are welcoming it. Some people are scared of it. Some people are fighting it. Some people want to regulate it into the ground. I tend to be a technology maximalist, an optimist. If we don't keep these algorithms here, they're just going to go offshore. And there essentially aren't any national boundaries anymore. Corporate medicine will go to where they can save the most costs and produce the most profits. So that's why I like to include people like Phil, who are on the inside in corporate America, on this podcast, to share with us their experiences in their professions, their leadership experiences, and personal stories. Stories that I feel benefit the physician 5 years behind us. So let's get right into it. This is Phil Lorch. All right, 3, 2, 1. What's going on, Phil? It's good to have you on the show, man.
Hey, Chuck. Good to talk to you.
So, you and I were at transition points in our careers right about the same time in St. Louis, Missouri. And
that's right.
Yeah. Before that, we were on Pendleton together. And you were an experienced Marine before I joined that battalion. Could you give us a little bit background about kind of what led up to you joining the Corps, and how you wound up in logistics?
Sure. It's been that was kind of a long road. So I'll kind of go back to when I was initially applying to schools. I applied to the Naval Academy. Put a package together, got everything situated, ended up not getting in there. So first kind of some discouragement there. And then applied to some various civilian schools, got accepted to some of those, and applied to the ROTC program. Well, as it turns out, I didn't get selected for that either. So I spent the majority of my college career enjoying college and at University of Missouri. So good state school at the time when I was going there. Had we were still part of the Big 12 before Missouri ended up joining the SEC. So huge football following, and that's actually when they were doing probably about the best that program's done in a while. And then as I was nearing kind of the end of junior year, going into my senior year, I kind of started thinking about the military again. My dad was a career naval aviator, flew F-14s and F-18s, and it was something that was kind of, growing up, that's what I thought I would always do. And so long story short, applied to the Navy OCS program to try to get a flight contract. And as was happening at that time, they only had specific slots available for surface warfare and some other things. And I had two individuals that I was rooming with at the time. One was a Marine, and he was a corporal in the Marine Corps, I think, at the time. And then I had another buddy, one of my best friends in college. He just got done with OCS in the Marine Corps. And he said, Phil, why don't you look at that? They have guaranteed flight contracts. So I said, okay. And I started looking at that. And the mission kind of spoke to me a little bit more. The first to fight and all that jazz kind of got me. And the commercial with the Marine slaying the dragon, like who doesn't love that? So I ended up going to OCS there as a flight contract, and then went to flight school, and I ended up washing out. I finished my last ground school test, and passing is an 80%, and I got a 78. So first, it was a huge blow. I knew I was done, and the frustrating part was there was nothing that I could do about it. But that's how I kind of became a supply chain and logistics officer.
Where were you geographically when you took that hit?
So I was in Pensacola at the time, in NAS Pensacola is where I was, because that's where Navy, Coast Guard, and Marines, that's where they head to flight school, as I'm sure you know.
Okay. And then how long were you in the program before you kind of got hit with those bricks and you're like, oh, wow, now I need to pivot?
So I was in probably about six to 9 months or so. I had a brief stint of 3 or 4 months over, which I guess was a foreshadowing, because I was the logistics officer for the new F-35 squadron, which was over at Eglin Air Force Base at the time. So I did that before I did my follow-on actual flight school training while I was waiting for a slot to kind of go through the program.
Got it. So you're at flight school. This happens. You didn't make the cut. But then how did you get the next, opportunity in logistics? And then what was it like your first few months in logistics school and at your first battalion?
Sure. So what they do is when you get redesignated, is what they call it, is you essentially put together your wish list, kind of like you do when you leave the basic school, which is the follow-on school, which I guess I should have mentioned before. So the cadence, when you go to, when you become a Marine officer, you go to officer candidate school that evaluates the proficiency and leadership characteristics that you have. And that's typically either a 10-week program or 2 6-week programs. And then they have the basic school, which is a 6-month program once you get commissioned as a second lieutenant. And then what happens is you're, at the end of that time, you are kind of certified in some effect as a provisional rifle platoon commander, able to lead Marines in combat. From that point, then you go on to your follow-on school, which in my case was flight school, and then it became actually supply school. So you put together your wish list at the end of the basic school, and they select you, and it typically happens, I think it was about a month before we kind of figured out where we were going for our follow-on school. And so you go through the same process again when you kind of wash out of flight school, and what they'll do is they'll you put together your wish list again, and whatever they have available is what they're going to slate you as. So I don't remember where supply chain and logistics were on my list, but that's what I got selected as. And so I got follow-on orders to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. It was actually outside, a small place outside, which called MCC Triple S. That's funny. I got my binder still on my shelf here. I was trying to look up to see what the school name was.
I saw you got that K-bar mounted on your wall too. That's a nice touch.
Yeah, that was kind of a post-deployment, I don't know, gift or award that my Marines gave me coming back from, I was on the first rotation of Special Purpose Marine Air Ground Task Force Crisis Response Central Command is what it was called at the time. I'm sure they've come up with a shorter name by now. At least I hope they have. Okay. But yeah, that's what that was for.
All right. So you do your first rotation as a logistics officer out of Lejeune. You deploy out of there. How was that first deployment? And then how long after that did you wind up on the West Coast?
Sure. So I actually, that was where the school was, but I had orders to 1st Maintenance Battalion in Camp Pendleton in the 43 area up there, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So I got orders there, and then so that was kind of, they cut you orders there before you go to the school, or at least that's how it worked for me. And then as soon as I got on the follow-on school, I went back. And then shortly after I came back, I guess as it happens, the table of organization is what it's called, where they have specific manning levels of each battalion. And another lieutenant was needed over at Supply Battalion. So I was what they call PCA'd over to, or what do they call it? Permanent change of assignment. So it was kind of an inter-unit or inter-regimental transfer, because it was still in the same regiment, to Supply Battalion. And that's I think where we met. I can't remember whether we met either before I deployed or after. I think it was after. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think you had come back, and I had about a year, or maybe a year and a half left. I can't remember, but yeah, we just we had a few mandatory fun events after work. Kicking back at the whatever. I think they would rent out those little breweries, in Oceanside.
Oh yeah.
But I like bringing. I mean, now that we've been out for a while, I always look back and I'm very glad that I got to learn from the line side, like people like you, because there's really no leadership training or managerial training in medicine. You're kind of thrown in these situations where you really need that, and I appreciated having you and a handful of others as colleagues that just basically just emulate your behaviors and the way that you would organize evolutions for your people. So how was that last rotation at Supply? Well, that was your second to last billet, right? supply
Yes.
battalion, and then later you would after that you went to St. Louis. So how was that transition?
Correct. Transition from an active duty battalion to a reserve battalion.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It was kind of a culture shock to me.
Okay.
There's definitely, being an active duty Marine assigned to a reserve unit, it's pretty difficult because, I mean, when we were in supply battalion together, you have 11, 1,200, 1,300 Marines sometimes, plus the Navy contingent as well for the, various support functions. Like that was a significant size battalion. And coming to St. Louis, if you can imagine, we have the same size battalion, different mission because it was a infantry unit, but we were expected to maintain equipment, make sure that everything was just as an active duty unit was, and I had a staff of 70 Marines to take care of the same amount of responsibilities as a battalion with 1,000 plus. So it was very difficult from the supply chain and maintenance side, the logistics side, to make sure that those vehicles, those weapons, those comm assets continue to remain in an operable order. So it definitely was a culture shock for sure.
I remember you traveling a fair amount during that time. Is that correct?
Yes. So, and that's another thing that was kind of a change because barring something like a deployment, you really, as a Marine, you were stationed at the duty station you were assigned to, and you didn't really deviate much from that. On the reserves, at least in the Marine Corps reserves, it's slightly different, where we had our command post, or our head shed is what we called it. I was the assistant inspector instructor there, and kind of dual hatted as the logistics officer / battalion XO / everything else. And what we did is, so the command was there, but we had 4 outlying companies in various parts of the southern United States. So I would have to fly there, and all of our assets, equipment, and everything that we needed to maintain was also there. So everyone was on the road all the time, trying to make sure that the reservists whom we supported had all of their equipment, everything was ready to go when they came in for drill weekend. But the higher headquarters was also in California, in San Francisco, California. Oh, wow. And then the headquarters above that was in New Orleans. So I'd say I probably was on the road 50, 75% of the time. It's just the nature of the job, trying to make sure, you're coordinating with higher headquarters, but you're also trying to maintain all the assets in your battalion, and make sure everyone was combat effective.
Got it. And that was right about the time you were planning your next move, which was to get out and get an MBA, right?
It was. So I was kind of at that inflection point that we all those of us that kind of stayed past our first initial commitment, you kind of get to that 8, 9, 10-year mark as an officer, and you're like, do I want to do 20 or, because, for me, it was a fork in the road. I needed to go to what other services called kind of their captain's career course, is called Expeditionary Warfighting School, which was my captain's PME that I needed to be complete in order to be eligible for major. So I was kind of weighing my options between, do I go back and get an MBA and go the civilian route and make the move now, or do I stay in where I definitely need to shift towards going back to school anyway to remain competitive for the next succeeding ranks. So that was definitely an inflection point, and something that it was very serendipitous that you also were in the same location.
Yeah, it's funny how that works out, man, because that was a major turning point in my life as well, an inflection point where I switched from clinical medicine, e.g. seeing patients, in the office of, being a pathologist, whereas now I'm in a laboratory, which is great for, I enjoy it. It's great, but the transition was quite challenging. So you didn't just go to any graduate education. You went to one of the top universities in the country, right?
That's right. I wanted to get the best bang for my buck, Chuck.
You got more than $2. You got many bucks out of that, right? Because that led to some good opportunities.
It did. I can't say enough good things about the program. So for everybody that's kind of listening, like Washington University in St. Louis is a great program. Like the business school there is second to none. And the individuals that I went through with, it was kind of eye-opening, and that I'd say that was a very good transition, because that's when I ended up making the decision to get out, as you kind of alluded to. And I wanted to go to the best. When I got accepted there, I thought that was the right move. Because, me being a knucklehead coming from a state school, like, I never thought that I would even be able to get into a school like that, knowing I didn't have the pedigree or what have you. But it was
it's funny how those things actually used to matter. And you and I are similar age, but that was the world that we grew up in, was you try to get into the best pedigree as you can. And things are very different now, but in the 90s, 80s, and before that was what you did, and everything was kind of hierarchical. So it definitely helps to get a good break like that, where you get into a good university. But and I was in a similar boat. I was a state school kid, kind of a knuckle dragger, and wound up at WashU for residency. But the process, feel free to disagree on this, but I noticed the process of going through that it was very much on the individual and not necessarily the piece of paper that you got into it. You know what I mean? It's 110% like what you did with those resources, versus just the credential itself. And you did a lot with it. You had several good opportunities that I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about, like the puppy logistics company. Then you were at Wayfair, and then you hit into the big leagues in big tech. So could you sketch that out a little bit?
Sure. So before we leave the MBA program, so I do agree with you. I think the process was, me getting out at, I forget what age that was. It was, 29, 30 years old, something like that. And, just sitting down with everyone and telling them kind of my story and my experience and stuff like that, because they really wanted to hear about the logistics background and what I did. And, as a Marine, I don't know. I'm sure we've met Marines that are very cocky and things like that, but I'm a very humble person by nature. So I didn't think anything of it when I was telling them my stories, what I've done through deployment, what I've done in various other countries in South America. And when I get through telling those stories, I could see the look on their faces, and they're just like, it was eye-opening to me because, here I am getting out. It's a huge culture shock. And I'm thinking I'm behind the eight ball because I have to catch up with all my peers that have been in the civilian world for the last almost 10 years. And what I found going through that program is I wasn't as far behind. Actually, in some regards, I was ahead of my peers. And so I think getting out, that was a good transition point for me because it gave me the confidence that, you know what, I do know what I'm doing. Even though the civilian world is a completely different ball of wax, like I got this. So when I transitioned out, I actually concurrently ran a building and later became two buildings at Wayfair, dealing in their final mile space. And that was kind of where their rapid expansion was happening. It was when they were opening a bunch of delivery stations because they wanted to control the experience to the customer. So much so that they said, hey, we gotta make a shift from third party. We need to control the experience. They installed a bunch of customer service liaisons to be able to have that personal touch. And we had multiple levels of service up to and including white glove, where we kind of built your furniture for you and everything, which was a huge transition from moving, weapons and other sensitive items, tanks, like all this stuff that I was used to moving in different countries. And I moved to a space that was very mature in terms of logistics, but kind of requires a different type of touch. Whereas, when you're dealing with other countries, depending on whether you're at war with them or not, whatever the case may be, especially if you're dealing with partner nations, we'll take that for an example. A lot of your relationships are built with the customs agents and of those specific countries, and you're making sure that your product can get in, your equipment and freight can get in when they need it to resupply your Marines downrange. And so it was quite a shift going to more of a customer service based aspect, just the way that those relationships work. So they shift from kind of dealing with the customs and dealing with the country in general, where you establish your logistics network in a very mature logistics space like the United States is, and it opens up a whole lot more opportunities to you and how you can get that freight to the customer. So happy to move into the puppy spot thing because that's where I was kind of segueing into. So I ended up taking an opportunity when I graduated WashU with my MBA and said, you know what, I need to try something different. I'd been at Wayfair at that point for around 2 years, maybe a little bit over, and I decided to embark kind of on my next opportunity, and that was kind of my first executive role that I had as the director of logistics for a smaller, about $50 million firm at the time. I kind of lost track of them. I don't know how they're doing now or what market cap they're at now, but it was a PE-backed firm. And it was right in the middle of COVID, which also added some layers into the complexity of the point A to point B. Because for a lot of individuals that, you think you get on your phone, you order it from Amazon and it shows up your door, and most people think, oh, it's point A to point B. Well, it's a lot more complex than that. So back to Puppy Spot. This was right in the middle of COVID. At the time, so I'll give you it's exactly what it sounds. It's live freight. So we moved, we basically connected breeders with prospective owners. And the majority of breeders in the United States are within the Midwest. So think Indiana, Missouri, Kansas, Ohio. And And the majority of the demand is actually in the coastal cities. So the current supply chain that they had into place that went away, which is one of the reasons why they brought me on, because they didn't have a logistician on staff until I came on board, is they were using commercial airlines to fly their puppies to the coast. And while that worked for a while, it was tended to be unreliable. Planes get delayed. You have to kind of marry up your final mile, if you will, where the vehicles that are meeting those puppies from the plane and taking them to the customer, that chain kind of broke. And the commercial airlines were all like, nope, we're not taking any live freight anymore. So we had to figure out another solution. And doing my cost benefit analysis of using private air, it was actually more cost effective for us to charter aircraft and then later procure our own aircraft with our own pilots, contracted pilots that flew for us, to create a more reliable network and a more positive experience for that puppy as they're in flight. So what I did is we contracted, like I said, private aircraft, veterinarians that were on every flight. And we partnered very closely with American Humane, who does a lot of the Hollywood movies and stuff like that. They're the ones that it's kind of the gold standard when it comes to animal handling. So we kind of took a page out of their book and made sure we were using all their standards that they set forth. And it created a lot more reliable network for us ultimately to be able to get puppies to the customer exactly when they wanted it, to their front door, with a warm handoff there. So white glove service to the door every single time. So that was a very interesting, albeit very stressful part of my career. Because it's...
Well, you hit it. You hit it well. I think that's that military bearing, because I think I was fighting my own battles at the time, but we met up a couple of times, and I remember you talking about that. So hats off. I used to jokingly say that's Phil's halo. Phil has this golden halo. He can make stuff happen and make it look easy. By the way, you still have that Escalade that you got a really good deal on? Wasn't that your golden halo?
Well, I did get a good deal on that, but I ended up having to get rid of it when I got down here to Florida, where I'm at now, and ended up getting a Tesla. So kind of went the other way there.
How do you like it?
It's actually I didn't think I would like it as much as I do. Just the technology, the way that it integrates into kind of it sounds like a commercial, but like just the driving experience, like you driving from point A to point B, it's amazing to see the technology integration that they have. And I think that's kind of what drew me to it. Not necessarily the electric, like saving the environment's great. And, we can get into another conversation on that. But I think the technology piece is really what drew me to it, because I'm kind of a tech nerd in that regard, I guess.
But that's awesome. But which model did you get?
So I got as you would imagine, the Model 3 Performance. So I didn't go with the Model S, but I also acquired, I think when you knew me in California, I had the Z06, the Corvette, and that was kind of my lieutenant mobile.
Yeah.
But I did actually get another one. So she's the garage queen now, and I have a 2019. Last year they made the manual transmission, But
Nice.
yeah, I use the Tesla mostly.
You got to live well, especially in it's Orlando, right?
Orlando. Yep.
Nice. So, Art. So, what's the verdict? Florida or San Diego? What is the ultimate nomination for Lieutenant Lorge
Well, so Lieutenant Lorge
or
would prefer
Captain
San
Lorge? I should
Diego.
Captain Lorge. Yeah.
Now, since I'm married, I think Orlando suits us better. It's close to Disney and Universal. We're talking about having kids soon, and I just can't seem to. It'd be hard to leave this place. So this was another one of those. I didn't think I would like it as much as I do, but so I think San Diego, while it was fun, just the cost of living up there, I think we got in at the right time here, and it was. It's definitely going to be a much better place to raise our kids here.
Yeah, absolutely. No, Orlando's awesome. So you're in Orlando and you had started working for Amazon before you got there, right? So,
Yes.
yeah, how was that when you first started?
So it's an interesting way that I got to Amazon. So I initially, before I went to Puppy Spot, I actually also got offered a position at Amazon to move out to San Francisco, um, and be an ops manager there. So I ended up saying no to them and went with Puppy Spot, because I enjoyed the fact that it would be my own network and creating something out of nothing. I always enjoy that type of challenge. And so about probably 9 months into the role, my wife, whom you know, Katie, she said, "Hey, Phil, like I really want to become a physician assistant." And I said, "Okay," being the logistician that I am. I tried to plan that out. Her number one choice was in Pomona, California, and she had some others that she was interested in, and she ended up applying to 5 or 6 PA programs, and we got to. So I ended up at again, this is one of those moments in your life that just kind of fit together, which I guess you could consider that the golden halo is. That recruiter reached out again and said, "Hey, Phil, we're still looking for individuals to come to Amazon in our operation space or final mile space." And so I talked to him and I said, well, had a conversation with Katie and said, if the numbers were right, we can get out to San Diego. And, they had to go back and forth a little bit, but they ended up, meeting me where I wanted to be at. And I said, okay, we're moving to San Diego. And I remember when we were in the transient housing, they give you kind of 30 days as part of the relocation package, which is another thing that drew me to Amazon, is it's full relocation. So we got over there. We weren't in our transient housing for 2 weeks before she got accepted to the PA program in Orlando. And that was kind of, we'll say, a little bit gut wrenching to me because I'm like, all right, I just made the call to move us out across the country. I know her number one choice is still here. This is still in the middle of COVID. And California was a little bit more stringent in their policies, as all states were, of course, different and applying some of the policies differently across the country. And so we were there for probably another 9 months. It was another 9 months we were there, and we flew out to this program. She got accepted to her number one school. And she was kind of prodding me, hey, what do you think? And I said, this is a decision you're going to have to make yourself. Like, I'll support you in whatever you do. That's why I made the decision to come out here and come to Amazon so we can set you up for success. And she spent a couple days and she came back and she said, I think I want to go to Orlando. You can imagine my expression when she said that. Going from St. Louis to San Diego, and now me having to try to figure out how to get us to Orlando. And so, I just thought that there was no way that she would turn down her number one program that she wanted to go to, that she's been talking about for the last 4 or 5 years at that point. And, but she did. And so I was actually able, because Amazon is such a large company, they were also in a rapid expansion phase in their final mile space. And they were launching a building here in Orlando, kind of on the outskirts, about 30 minutes from downtown Orlando.
Okay.
At the time. And they accepted me for that slot. And so I launched the building there. And we were able, 9 months after I moved to Amazon, we headed from the West Coast all the way back to the East Coast, probably about as far of a drive as you could possibly go. With the exception of probably coming from, I'm sure Miami to Seattle is probably a little bit longer, but I can't imagine by that much.
Yeah, that's officially cross country, my friend. But so can you tell me, like, the good, like professionally, like launching this building outside of Orlando, this big professional move, the accomplishments in the early years with Amazon. Can you talk about the good and then kind of transition to the material that was in those articles?
Sure. So Amazon, I think they strive for excellence, and I think the benefit of that, and we talk about Doug Harrington, who is our CEO of Worldwide Stores below Andy Jassy. He talks a lot about speed and cost to serve. And what he means by that is the experience that you have as a customer. We need to get faster, which I think every logistics network wants to get to that point. They want to get faster and faster and faster, especially as it relates to smaller household goods and stuff like that. Whereas, say you're out of dish soap and, you're trying to wash the dishes right now, and, you look on your Amazon app and they say, hey, I can just wait 2 or 3 hours and order it right now, and it'll be at my front door. I think Amazon is the only one logistics network, at least that I've been at so far, that has the ability to do that. I think that's amazing. We have such high standards, and I think the effect of that translates to the customer, because you have the ability to go on about your daily life and make it the most convenient for you of when you're going to get that delivery, whether you think about it beforehand or not, which I think is amazing that we're able to do that in such with such accuracy.
It is funny, the complete opposite, I guess, personal standards between a high-level logistics professional and kind of the customer mindset. We've become so lazy in the West, right? So it's just like you as a Marine or me, like, managing supplies for a clinic. Everything has a backup. You're always, like, logisticians are known for having battlefield meetings months in advance so that you never run out of dish soap. You never, everything is thought through. There's backups upon backups upon backups.
Oh yeah, and we can get into the priorities. Back in the Marine Corps, especially as it relates to medical items, is you also have the restrictions of having to order from a U.S. company and the other type of restrictions and kind of hoops that you have to jump through. And if those firms don't have the availability, well, then there's all these justifications that you have to put together to surpass that to get it quicker. And so you're right. You're absolutely right. So that pushes the planning back that much farther, to where, again, in that mature logistics network that we have in the United States, like that's, in the West in general, like it's just, it's wild to me, the different types of planning and the different types of coordination that go into that. Because it still requires a lot of coordination to get it to your house, 3 hours after you order it or 4 hours after you order it. Like,
absolutely, man. We just did that the other day. So it's funny how we scheduled this conversation right at the time we just ordered a brand new puppy. We didn't order it; we just picked it up. So that overlaps with the Lorge timeline, and we got dish soap on Friday. So there you go. It's a twofer.
There you go.
But yeah, I think one of the things that we talked about earlier was the changes that were happening in the higher ranks or middle ranks of Amazon. And obviously, if you had seen that coming earlier, I don't know how your professional decisions would have turned out. I mean, you're a smart guy. If you had known things would change, then you probably, being the logistician that you are, you would have started planning your next pivot. So what has been going on in the ranks?
So there were a couple of news articles, I'm sure for everyone listening, you can probably search them on Fortune and Business Insider. The decision was made this year to not give out raises after record profits this past quarter and before that, to the L6s and above. So Amazon's kind of stratified into the L1 to L12. L1 or Tier 1, as we call them, are hourly associates. And then your 4s and 5s are kind of your first level of management. Your 3s are your supervisors. And then your 6s are kind of like your mid-level senior managers. And then 7 is the first executive level. And then it goes up to 8, skips 9. Don't ask me why, I don't know. And then your 10 and 11s are kind of like your VP, and then your 11s are your S team, and then 12 is Andy Jassy. There's only one 12. So pretty similar to what kind of how the military is stratified.
Okay.
So from L6 and above, corporate made the decision across the board, and that's all business lines. That's not just operations. That's, AWS, and all the other professional organizations that don't necessarily have to do with logistics. That decision was made at the highest levels, from what I understand. And so and I guess I can talk about the process. So every year you go through, as exempt managers, you go through a recomp process to where we have one-on-ones every single month. So pretty similar to the cadence that I had in the Marine Corps when I was there, which I enjoyed because not a lot of other companies did that. And then you have two evaluation phases where you're kind of rated, and at the end of the year, at the beginning of the year, you're kind of rated for that next bonus. So next recomp phase. So they evaluate compensation yearly and determine based on the market pressures and whatever's going on at the macro level, and they determine what the compensation will be for the following year. So that was kind of tough to hear. I wasn't part of the decision-making process or anything like that, obviously, but or maybe not obviously, but it did create kind of some angst within my leadership team and things that I had to kind of talk through. And this is a business decision made by Amazon. It wasn't just operations, and we talked a little bit before kind of this interview, but I still don't know how I feel about it. Like, I can't say if I wasn't at those senior levels, I wouldn't have made the same decision, because we are trying to become more efficient and trying to provide more value to the customer. But for those individuals, and in the past years, we'll say the last 5 or 10 years or so, at that L6 level, that's kind of where a pretty large chunk of your compensation is determined by the equity that you have in the company. So during that recomp process, you get not only a small percentage bump in your base pay, depending on what you're rated at, you also get equity for 2 years out. So our equity for this year, for example, is already determined. Okay. But the equity for next year is the news and kind of what they were referring to. Okay. And so that hurts a lot of people at the L6 level in particular, and then on up, of course. Amazon compensates very well for what they how can I put this? That Amazon pays you very well, but they will get every dollar out of you.
Okay.
So in that regard, and over the last 5 or 10 years, most managers, they're like, oh, it's okay. They gave me a lot of equity that's going to appreciate in the following years. But there's a lot of uncertainty now, as I'm sure you know, with an election coming up, with, you've seen, just looking at other tech companies, there have been mass layoffs. There was layoffs at Amazon. There was layoffs at Tesla. There was layoffs at all these other tech companies. And they're preparing for something. What that is, I don't know. But there is something that they're preparing for austerity. And I'm not sure what the driving force behind that is. Just showing what kind of record numbers that we are putting up. But somebody's reading the tea leaves across multiple, tech companies and seeing that there is some risk out there. So I think this is a risk mitigating strategy, but in terms of how it's articulated to the managers, I'm not sure they understand kind of the macro impact of that. So tried to explain it to them as best I could, from what I understood. But, Amazon is a large corporation and they make business decisions, sometimes for better or worse, for the company, impacting those senior managers to some degree. And, you have to deal with on the ground level, in terms of their frustration, of course.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that makes sense. No, but is it one of those things where Amazon is so big that it's these executives? I mean, they have transferable skills, right? I mean,
sure.
They must be very highly sought after if they're coming from a big tech company, right? With the problem solving that you have to do in that organization, right? So,
Yeah, I mean,
they're risking the loss of talent.
but as maybe that's by design. I just don't know. Like maybe there is an attrition number that they want to get to that is an acceptable level. I think you're going to see people depart at the end of the year, because that's when the last vest happens for them. So, I think you're going to see people finding other opportunities out there, and maybe that's by design. But I don't have any visibility into that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it has me, quite frankly, looking at other options, looking at other opportunities out there, because we have a lot of great individuals at Amazon, and that's why they pay a premium. We have very smart managers, and they pay a premium for that because they can. And maybe they're trying to kind of realign their compensation structure in such a way to where maybe they're automating to such a degree where they don't necessarily need that top tier talent anymore, and they can rely on talent that's a little bit more financially advantageous to them.
Yeah, that's how it goes, man. They got to do what's right for the company, but at the same time, if you're in the middle, it doesn't exactly make your life easier. So, what types with someone with your background, like what types of things would you pivot to?
So for me, I'm kind of looking for, so I'm at a point in my career. I'm now 16 years into supply chain and logistics in terms of experience. And, I think the best way I can explain it is I want a seat at the table, and maybe not necessarily at the head of the table, as of course, but I really enjoyed my career and what I had at Puppy Spot because it was my logistics network. It was my vision, and I could kind of put my thumbprint on how things were done there. And to me, working on the strategy of a network, a logistics network, like that's important, and that's rewarding to me because I can still look back at some of the things I did at Wayfair that they do today, and I can say I was leading that process improvement project. That to me is the type of reward that you can't. While financially it's nice to get paid well, like that is something that drives me is putting my mark on things. And maybe it goes back to being an Eagle Scout way back when, of leaving nature better than you found it, but that's how I feel. And so I think that, or focusing on some sort of individual entrepreneurship venture, which going back to Wash U, it was very entrepreneurial based. So somewhere where I can, if I'm going to work 60, 70, 80 hours like I do at Amazon every single week, I can reap the full benefit of that, of my hard work, and kind of be my own boss and make decisions for the company, potentially my company, that benefit not only me, but are the best decision for the way that company should go. So.
Absolutely, man. Your arc that you've taken over the last 15 years is, I think there's a lot of learning points for a 20-something who's thinking about joining the Marines or the Navy, isn't quite sure what they want to do, but they have a similar drive. I mean, everything that you just described in terms of goals, like that's what I want too. I mean, that's half the reason I started this podcast, because I wanted to have a little piece of, something that I'm directing that I can steer as a service that solves someone's problem. But I think you were in the military a little bit longer than I was. So have you noticed some changes from, like what you see it now, like the Marine Corps now, versus when you joined, or maybe in your father's generation? I mean, he was Navy, but in the aviation community. And what would you tell a 20-something, maybe 21-year-old kid who's thinking about joining the Marines? Like, how should they prepare both strategically and financially?
Well, that's a question and a half. So they have, so the Marine Corps has this old moniker that, back in my corps, it wasn't like that. So I think we constantly change. While there are traditions that's involved in terms of the Marine Corps and the Navy Marine Corps team, like going back to, my dad was in the Navy. Everybody's, I'm sure at this point, seen Top Gun. If you don't, you should go watch it because it's awesome. Yeah. That was the epitome, especially the original Top Gun. Like, that was his experience as a naval aviator. Like, when they went to the O Club, when they did that sort of thing, went out, like, all of that was relegated to base. And so you saw a lot more individuals that were in that micro, like, kind of in that ecosystem of being on base, being a part of, the O Club or the E Club, or for those that you don't know, the officer club we call the O Club, and the enlisted club we call the E Club. And, that was a place for people to meet and people to meet other people. And when I was when you were in, Chuck, like, it got away from that. Like, the O Club was a shell of what it once was. Like, it wasn't the central point of people meeting that you had in years past in the 80s and 90s. So I think there's a fundamental shift there. And I even think it's shifted now with some of the principles that, while remain the same, I think it's just a logical progression as we go on. Like, we used to say that, and I think it's still true today, is, 18 years or 22 years of classical conditioning can't, 10 weeks or 16 weeks, whether you're enlisted or officer, can't undo the 18 to 22 years of classical conditioning that you had years prior. So we come from all different walks of life. And I think as those walks of life kind of change in society, I think you're going to see a natural shift in the services. But from what I would say to an individual that's young and looking at military service is, hold yourself to a higher standard. Like, I still believe that, and one of the things at the basic school in the Marine Corps that they taught us is your character has to be beyond reproach. You're a man or woman of exemplary character. And that's how I strive to live my life. Do I fall every once in a while and maybe get away from that? Sure, we all make mistakes. But I think integrity, especially in today's day and age, I think is something that's timeless. Like, so integrity always, I would say from a financial standpoint, focus on your goals and what you need to do to get there, but also consider the financial burden that you're going to put on yourself and your future family, or maybe your current family if you already have one, and be mindful of that. Like, I know Dave Ramsey gets a lot of flack, and but some of his principles are, kind of still ring true, and those are some other timeless things: is be responsible with your money. Um, we have a huge deficit when it comes to the country and the U.S. and how much in debt we are. Like, don't live your life that way. Like, your personal life, you should be able to sustain that lifestyle and live below your means, so that you can save for the future, and you can save for your future family or save for retirement or what have you. So it's never too early to start. And I remember how hard it was when I first started my IRA at 22 years old, when I first got my big boy job,
Yep.
putting away that $6,500 a year or something like that, or
Yep.
or $5,500 a year, whatever it was. Um, and it gets easier and easier, and you just get used to putting away that money, um, irrespective of the pension, which I'm sure is, I guess it's not even a conversation now, because those individuals going into the military now aren't even eligible for a pension. Uh,
Well, they did away
it,
with that, so you don't get the 20-year.
they did. I think it was in 2017, 2018. So all new service members are automatically enrolled in the TSP, but they aren't eligible for. There's no pension, which is we talked about what's going to change the makeup of the military, and I don't think you're seeing that effect yet. I think in about 10 years you'll start to see that effect of individuals that would stay in for their career, maybe find something more competitive in the civilian world, and there's nothing tying them into the Marine Corps. Because, for example, at Amazon, if you're an hourly associate, we'll pay for your college. It's free. There's no payback period. Um, and so the GI Bill doesn't have as much strength as it did before. And then taking the pension away, I think that's where you're going to see that fundamental change, and it's going to become more like, in my opinion, it's going to become more like a corporate organization as we move forward, because you're not going to have the the types of incentives that retain people, as much as you did before with other organizations. And I guess that's all these corporate organizations that are offering tuition assistance. That's a great thing to do. And I think that's a huge benefit for those either less fortunate or those trying to, not go into any further debt or not go into debt at all. Find a company that's going to do that for you.
I agree. You want to avoid debt as much as possible. And for some of the people listening to this podcast, it's worth pointing out that the idea of going into debt to become a physician is basically an American concept. I trained in St. Louis with, I'd say at least a third of my colleagues were from overseas medical schools, and they had zero debt because the countries where they're educated in, the government just pays for it. It's considered mandatory that the population have a well-trained, force of physicians. But in the United States, when it comes to financial planning for the young doctor, I don't know how you make a case for going into debt to the tune of $300,000 to $400,000 if you include undergraduate. I don't know how you make a case because, you get a good lifestyle as a physician, but it's not like real wealth. You know what I mean? I'm not, you know what I mean? You're not, this isn't monopoly wealth where you're like, getting, in the tens of millions of dollars from real estate revenue.
Sure.
It's a good life, but it's not that good of a life, So I think military service for the healthcare professions is one of the best ways to do because, number one, you get your school paid for. Number two, you had I don't know why we can get into this later, but I guess there's no benefit with the pension anymore if you wanted to stay in. But then the other thing is that you get great training, like you get invaluable skills from either green side or blue side that will pay dividends later in your career. I can't tell you how many times.
Absolutely.
I can't tell you how many times those leadership skills that the Marines taught me have helped me in my current job, in my last job, at professional organizations all over the country. It's just irreplaceable. Now, the issue of like the pension going away in the military, my question to you is, I know that everything in the U.S. military, it goes in like these waves, and those waves always revolve around major conflict. So do you think that they will sweeten the deal, if we enter another like full scale, major, U.S. driven conflict?
They're actually already experimenting with that. So, which I thought was the most interesting. I actually saw it on a MAR admin, which was, for those of you that don't know, it's kind of a general release for all Marines that comes out in a, specific format. But what they're doing is they're experimenting with those individuals in the tech community, specifically IT, and they're experimenting with your taking your experience and equating that into a rank. So instead of coming in as a E1, E2, E3, or a, something like that, you're coming in as maybe a E7, E8, or on the officer side. And I know they have programs like that too with law school and the medical community, where you come in as a more senior rank. You come in as a captain or a lieutenant and an 03 or 04 sometimes, instead of like I had to do coming in as a logistics officer as an 01. So there is some financial incentive there. But I think on the enlisted side, talking about like, just those low density specialties, it's interesting to see how they're using that to their advantage now. So very interesting time to be in, and I'm interested to see how they're going to leverage that.
Yeah, absolutely. So wrapping up, let me just conclude with like your take on kind of like what's going on in the country as a whole, like culturally and kind of economically and politically. What do you think is going to happen in November, and how is that going to impact your industry?
Well, that's not a light question to end on, is it? Well, from my perspective, I would say that just talking about the stuff that we talked through with Amazon preparing for austerity, I think there's a lot of uncertainty in the macroeconomics. We saw with the interest rates holding steady, like with the overnight interest rate holding steady, all of the other interest rates are going to hold stable. Give or take, a couple hundred basis points back and forth. I feel like they're buying time to see what the outcome of the election is. I think there's a lot of uncertainty now, but that's kind of baked into the market, which is why you're not seeing huge swings here and there. Again, like just talking about the current cases that were decided and everything like that, I think that has some impact as well, regardless of what side of the proverbial fence you fall on. Trump getting convicted on 34 counts is definitely, something of a concern, because I think the decorum and of what it was to be a politician, I think also has changed, because individuals that we probably need to be in office now, I don't think have much incentive to be in office. Like, I would consider it maybe 20, 30 years ago if I was born 20 or 30 years earlier, but I wouldn't even, it wouldn't even be a thought to me now, because I don't want to be poked and prodded and, just the things that they go to. I mean, you can see the same thing with President Biden too, to talk about the other side of the coin with his son, and with, the classified documents and everything like that. Even back to the previous administration. So, like, there's been a lot of churn, I think, that the American public has, still waiting with bated breath, I feel like, because all these things are happening, and, we need a leader that's going to be able to unify us as a country. And I don't know if there is that individual currently even in political office right now, because of what's been going on the last 5 to 10 years. So I think we're...
Yeah, man. No, I've been having similar thoughts myself, within the confines of my, scope of practice and my industry. But so the real question, Phil, is what I'm trying to ask you is that, do I need to take my cash and just buy land way out in West Texas, retreat to the desert and build a compound? And if the answer is yes, will you help me build that compound? That's what I'm trying to say.
I'm happy to go halvesies on a property in West Texas if you want to.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Phil. Hope y'all enjoyed that episode, catching up with a good friend of mine and prior Marine. You can find Phil on LinkedIn. I'll paste that in the show notes. And we are back in the sauna of Dallas, Texas. Summer is here. This is a time I like to lay low, reflect a little bit, disappear out into the small towns, book a cabin, turn off the phone, break out the typewriter, typity-type. That's what it's about. I think this new era that we live in, you have to be intentional about when you're going to be online and plugged in and when you're going to be offline. It helps you maintain your sanity in this new modern world that we live in. So that's all for today's episode of 3 Deeper Cuts, the lifestyle magazine for the practicing surgical pathologist, bringing you high-signal content fueled by 10% buffered neutral formalin. Glad you're here. And if you like this content, subscribe to get these emailed to you, 3deepercuts.substack.com. You can also drop your email on the list at 3deepercuts.net. Follow us on X at 3deepercuts. 3 Deeper Cuts into the paraffin tissue block in search of that elusive diagnosis. That's what we do as practicing surgical pathologists. You can find us on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify. Hope you have an excellent rest of your days, professors. I'm your host, Chuck G. Until next time, be well and stay curious. Goodbye.